I still remember my nerves on my first day as a graduate trainee in a city law firm, looking around and realising that there weren't very many people who looked or sounded like me. Since then, progress has been made in opening up the profession to people from diverse backgrounds, but there's still plenty of work to do. Law is a fantastic profession. Anyone who wants to should have the chance not only to join, but to be able to progress as far as their talents can take them. That's why I'm proud to be chairing the Levelling Up Law project. We have brought together 15 leading city law firms committed to the Levelling Up agenda to work on ensuring law is a profession open to anyone, no matter where they start. Working together with those firms, our leading university vice-chancellors and the City of London Law Society, we will be tackling the issues around access, recruitment and progression. We will be creating the first sector-wide Levelling Up action plan that will ensure the law profession is able to go further, faster on boosting social mobility and spreading opportunity.
Thank you so much to all of you for joining us on what I hope will be the beginning of a project that can really be a watershed moment, obviously, for both the law sector and the City of London in particular, but also the universities that we've got on the line. I think as I get going, I'd like to say a few thank yous. First of all, a special thank you, not just to the many law firms that are represented on this project, but particularly to Sarah Clover of Clyde & Co. Hi, Sarah, who's really worked with us through a number of months to pull things together, and also Colin Passmore of Simmons & Simmons. I met Colin some time ago now, actually, and in many respects, the ideas for doing this piece of work came out of those conversations that Colin and I had, and some of the challenges in the sense that Colin was identifying that he felt a wider sector needed to continue to address. We'll hear later from Edward Sparrow, Chair of the City of London Law Society, also Jane Harrington, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Greenwich, and of course my colleague Seema Kennedy, who will be very involved in this project going forward. I'd also like to say a big shout out. I can see some of our Vice-Chancellors on the call as well. Karen Bryan, Professor Karen Bryan from the York St John University, also Peter Johns from the University of West London. We just saw Professor Liz Barnes from Staffordshire University, Professor Andrew Wathy from Northumbria University. You just you'll hear briefly from Jane Harrington from Greenwich shortly. And then, of course, also Professor Kieran Trehan from the University of York, who's doing a piece of work for us on measurement of impact. We've got quite a lot to get through. I think perhaps before we get the intros from Seema, Edward, and also Jane Harrington, if I can perhaps just set the scene a little bit more in terms of the backdrop to this project. Obviously, the bigger picture to this is, I think, an ESG agenda that I'm sure is top of mind for many of the clients you work for, as well as you as law companies, now coming together almost with a political agenda for the first time, which is that levelling up and, of course, net zero are these also two priorities for the country and for national government. So I think we finally all get into, perhaps for the first time, the same place. And I think for 2021, that really then puts us in an absolutely pivotal position as a group to show some leadership and have some real impact on the ground. I think that the whole area of responsible business, responsible capitalism, is going to be something that rises up the agenda alongside levelling up as a way in which we can see, in particular, businesses help take this agenda forward. And I think, we get into the spring able to finally see perhaps life beyond lockdown and life beyond, if you like, dealing with the immediate COVID crisis. And I think it's inevitable that attention is already and rightly turning to what kind of country we are building afterwards. And that's very much something that's been on my agenda for some time. And I know a lot of you have also been doing a lot of thinking about this. From my perspective, this wider issue of levelling up has really been something that I know many of us have worked on now for many, many years. Although it's at the top of the political agenda right now, probably when I first met many of you, it was long before then. I think Colin and I were having our discussions possibly back in early 2019. I did with a number of the law firms who are on this call. We've got some vice chancellors here who, I probably first had a detailed discussion on levelling up with, back in 2018. So I think what's happened is in so many respects, we've been a cohort of people who were early adopters of understanding that levelling up really matters. And I think the key now is this piece of work to really show that we can almost move from diagnosing a problem to being able to really start to put in place some concrete solutions and an action plan for what we now do. I mean, obviously, all of you were pioneers in a sense. You were part of the work we started doing on the Social Mobility Pledge as early as 2018. That whole project, in a sense, grew rapidly. We now have hundreds of businesses involved. Collectively, they employ around 5.5 or so million people. So it really has the breadth now approaching the CBI. We have around 90 universities involved, of which a core are really the trailblazers at the heart of this. And we really tried to use that Social Mobility Pledge Coalition to then perhaps work with the most activist businesses and the most activist universities to really do thought leadership on all of this. And I've called that the Purpose Coalition. And it really is the group of the universities and the group of the businesses, in a sense, that have really wanted to go the furthest, fastest, that have wanted to really get under the skin of how we can deliver thought leadership, and are the ones that are really on the ground, the practitioners, in a sense, of trying very different approaches on how they as organizations can drive levelling up. And I very much see this Levelling Up Law project sitting alongside that, and hopefully also being something that, in a sense, I think for many of the law firms who are part of this, can give you a sense of the next steps that you can make in a very practical journey to being part of how we deliver levelling up. So it's an exciting time. The first thing we have done, to finish off, in a sense, my introduction, the first thing we've done in this smaller core of the Purpose Coalition, these businesses and universities right at the heart of the Social Mobility Pledge movement, has really been to look at how we could take this concept of levelling up and make it more actionable. And it really struck me towards the end of last year how, and perhaps this is so often when a phrase becomes used politically a lot, there was a genuine question in the minds of commentators and politicians and some of the ministers that I talked to about what levelling up really means. And so what we wanted to do through the Purpose Coalition was really to set that out in some clarity. I think the approach from my perspective came from the work that I had done as Development Secretary back in 2015, looking at what the next development goals should be after the Millennium Development Goals came to their end in 2015. We brought forward what would become called the Sustainable Development Goals. It was a mammoth piece of work, and it was a huge task to get 190 plus countries that, of course, included Russia, China, America, some very, very different countries with very different perspectives, to find a set of 17 sustainable goals, development goals, that they could all come around. It was quite possibly actually the last time the UN system was able to agree on anything of this magnitude. But essentially, I think we can take that approach and bring it to levelling up. Because what the SDGs were able to do was to take a complex problem of development, and I would say, in a sense, we're almost like a developing country when it comes to social mobility. We're one of the countries that lay behind and we need to catch up. It was to take that complex problem of levelling up and break it down into its constituent components. So through the Purpose Coalition work, we came up with 14 levelling up goals. And these are 14 goals that if we are able to crack them, then Britain does become far more levelled up. So that's, in a sense, the task that we all have to run towards. And many of the Purpose Coalition businesses are asking themselves how they can deliver on some of those goals that really, really apply to them. And I think my ambition for this work is that for the legal sector, that we can really look at how two of these key goals that you've already done a lot of thinking around, which are levelling up goal 5 around open recruitment, but then levelling up goal 6 around fair progression, how we can really use this project as almost a watershed moment for you to become the exemplars to a wider corporate Britain on how you deliver these goals effectively. And coming from a position of being a profession where you've had your challenges on making sure that you're open to that rich diversity, that talent base that we've got. But I think that's the prize that we have today. And above all, coming up with solutions. So going beyond just diagnosing problems to really getting under the skin of what it's going to take, working together with the VCs we've got, who really are these vice chancellors, perhaps are closest to understanding how levelling up is on the ground for the students and the communities that they're engaged with. I think they're a group of vice chancellors that we can really tap into their expertise on this, and also I think bringing you all together is the way that we will start to unlock hopefully some solutions on this issue. So yes, we've got a big piece of work ahead of us. We're going to move at breakneck speed. I can come on shortly to talk about, if you like, how we're going to approach the working groups. It'll be really important to get your prompt engagement and your ideas. We need to keep moving forward. You know, I don't want to be sort of going back a step. It's important that we quite sequentially move through this piece of work. But yes, we've got a massive chance ahead of us. So thanks very much for engagement. Brilliant to have so many of you part of this. And if I can now just hand over to Seema Kennedy for her introduction, and I think she'll give you, I'm sure, a very personal take on why she thinks this is such an important project and her involvement in it.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Justine. And it's lovely to see some familiar faces on the screen, but actually our coalition this afternoon takes up 4 gallery screens of my laptop, and that is hugely heartening and encouraging to me as somebody who began my professional life at Slaughter & May over 20 years ago. And I still remember the absolute feeling of dread. I walked in, girl from a northern town with an Iranian father, first person from my family to go to university in what was one of the best and remains one of the absolute best law firms in the country. Now, that was a real culture shock for me, and there were lots of things that happened to me while I was there, and experiences that I had that made me the person I am today, for better or worse. And I know that some of the experiences I had all those years ago are not repeated, and that there has been enormous strides in city law firms, and particularly amongst you and everybody who's so committed to this project. And I know how busy you all are, and you're willing to take hours and hours out of your time to do that. And that commitment for me is hugely heartening and very, very exciting. There has been progress. The profession is more diverse and on access and retention, but we know it can be improved. And as Justine said, that's coming from political pressure, it's coming from the people you recruit from, it's coming from your clients and from the other firms that you work with. And I think, well, all of us, I know from me, we've all had time to reflect over this year of the pandemic about what's important in our lives and how we want the world to change and how we want to be part of that, building back better, that levelling up agenda. I think being a solicitor is a fantastic profession, and we want to have as diverse and open a profession as we can do, and we want to make that change. I know that all of you are really, really committed to it, and I'm really delighted that I'm chairing this project. It is going to be hard work. We've got a really tight agenda. I think we're starting next week. We've got 3 sessions, and then we've got more sessions going on until we get the report out. But it's all about real action and real change. A lot of people who know nothing about lawyers say, oh, you're all just there to cause problems, but that's completely wrong. I know from my experience of the profession, both as a solicitor and client side, what you want is real solutions and real change. We're not interested, and none of you is interested, in producing a report that sits on a shelf and doesn't actually show meaningful change for you, your clients, and the people that you employ and the people you work for. So I'm very, very grateful to all of you, particularly to Sarah and Edward and everybody involved in the City of London Law Society for your great efforts in getting all these people together. I just think it's an amazing achievement to have however many people we've got on this call and who are committed to this. And I just want to get going, because this is, as Justine said, this is going to be an exemplar for other professions and other industries, and I'm really excited to get going and get working. And I would like now to hand over to Edward Sparrow, who's the chairman of the CLLS, who will explain some of the thinking about what his organisation's motivations have been in getting involved. Edward.
Thank you, Justine. Thank you, Seema, for your introductions. And thank you all the Vice Chancellors who are joining this group of city lawyers. I hope it will be, well, it's probably an unusual experience for you. I hope it'll be the beginning of a very pleasant experience and a very fruitful one. I would just add to what Justine said, that she talked about 2 agendas coming together, the ESG and the political agenda. I would add that there's actually a 3rd agenda, which is that all the firms on this call, and indeed probably many firms beyond that, have exactly the same agenda. We all are looking to improve social mobility and diversity within our firms. As chair of City of London Law Society, I've spoken many times about the potential benefits of greater cooperation and coordination between our member firms, the charitable sector and others, to broaden access to our profession and to improve diversity in city firms and across the city. I'm delighted to be speaking today at the launch of Levelling Up Law, a project which I hope can deliver that cooperation and coordination. We are proud that CLLS members already engage in a number of initiatives aimed at broadening the backgrounds from which they recruit their younger lawyers. They recognise the benefits which greater diversity brings, helping to attract the best talent, achieving diversity of thinking, and remaining relevant to clients. However, these initiatives are often firm-specific, and learnings, best practice, and impact are not widely shared between law firms or externally. And in the context of a political agenda, they are not well known. That is why I'm particularly pleased that through the commitment of 15 of our corporate member firms, the City of London Law Society is able to support this unique and collaborative project. I hope that this initiative will stand as an excellent example of what can be achieved when businesses work together and work with the education or other public or charitable sectors. I'm also pleased that our profession is the first sector-wide initiative that the Social Mobility Pledge is launching. By facilitating conversations between law firms and universities, which they do not have existing connections with, and focusing on outreach, recruitment, and progress, these working groups will address the core issues at the heart of improving social mobility and addressing current barriers. I also hope that by engaging in this unique forum, firms and universities will build lasting relationships for their mutual benefit and for the benefit of the undergraduates at those universities. While the opportunity for Vice Chancellors to gain a fuller understanding of what law firms require will also help universities to design programs which equip students with the best chances of success. In time, the ideas and recommendations that come from this exercise can hopefully be shared widely so that the project can be used as a showcase and replicated across other sectors. The City of London Law Society is very grateful to this first group of 15 law firms who are taking part in this pioneering initiative, and to the Social Mobility Pledge and Seema Kennedy for leading the project, and for the universities who are participating opposite us. As we look ahead to the post-pandemic landscape, the importance of levelling up and equality of opportunity will be more important than ever. This initiative will help showcase the legal sector's work and its commitment to social mobility. And I thank you all on behalf of the CLNS for your participation. We hope that you will find it a useful and worthwhile experience.
Thanks very much, Edward. That is much appreciated. I've also just spotted we've got Mark Power, Registrar and Chief Operating Officer of Liverpool John Moores University on the line, and also brilliantly Baroness Newlove, who is involved in a leading player within the University of Bolton. You're very welcome, Baroness Newlove. Absolutely delighted that you're part of this as well. I'm just going to now briefly get an introduction on behalf of the universities. I asked Professor Jane Harrington of the University of Greenwich, obviously literally across from the City of London, if she can perhaps give her perspective, and I hope that through the wider session we'll be able to also hear from the other Vice Chancellors who are part of this call. But in the meantime, over to you, Jane.
Thank you, Justine, and thank you and the team for actually getting this sector-wide project over the line and for bringing us all together, because it's great, as has already been said, to see such a huge range of stakeholders around this virtual table, and to have 15 law firms involved. I think it's a real achievement, so that's fantastic. Now, the University of Greenwich, as you rightly say, is based across the river, and so many of our students can actually almost see the law firms outside from their windows. But just a tiny bit to put this in perspective. I mean, our students come from some of the most deprived boroughs of London. 50%, well, in fact, it's now over 50% are from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. The vast majority of those are the first in their family to go to university, and most of them have to work part-time while they're studying to be able to afford to go to university. What many of them lack is social networks, and many of them lack confidence. What they don't lack is skills and ambition. And I think that's often forgotten, that they're as ambitious as everybody else. They just don't always know how to access that. Now, I'm really delighted to be here. I think this partnership work has the real possibility to change lives of these students, and to help them to achieve their ambitions. And I would say because of, rather than despite their backgrounds. And I think it also helps the law firms to have a wider talent pool. So if we can really work together to understand each other's needs, I think there's the most amazing potential here. And what's really great, I think, is that we're starting to have a shared understanding that there is a need for change, and that there will be genuine benefits to the law firms becoming more diverse. And I would second what Edward said just now, that actually the fact that this is the first sector, I think is really important. And I think it will be really, and it will make a real marked difference on some of the later discussions we might have in other sectors. But I think the fact that we are going to work together to ensure that young people from more diverse university backgrounds and universities stay and prosper with your firms will be really fabulous. And I'm really looking forward to working over the next few months and to create, as both of you have already said, some really genuine, long-lasting relationships. I don't see this as something that's just for the next few weeks. I see this as something for the future going forwards. So thanks very much for inviting me to say something, and I'm just looking forward now to actually getting on with the work and making it happen. So thanks, Justine.
Brilliant, thank you, Jane. And I think what you've just said underlines the huge opportunity we now have. This project will be what we make of it, in a sense, but we have finally got the right people in the room, as it were, all together, all around the table. It's brilliant to have Seema Kennedy chairing this, because she has her very direct experience within this sector, and I think that really matters. And I think it's incredibly timely to be kicking off what can be a transformational project at the very moment, actually, when a wider country is obviously looking at what the solutions are on levelling up. And there's a real appetite, I think, for seeing those solutions emerge. So the next two pieces I just wanted to talk through now, before we move on to the Q&A, are the aims and ambitions of the project itself. We've really touched on them an awful lot already. But then just to talk about the structure of the working groups, and if you like, how we feel it's best to sort of get you all able to feed in, and then steadily we can actually reap all of that best practice and craft it hopefully into some recommendations and an action plan. So just in terms of the aims and the ambition, I mean, obviously what we want to make sure is that we can come out with a series of key recommendations and actions that can hang together, that stretch across the three working group areas that we have identified, both on outreach work, on the recruitment piece of talent coming into your law firms, and then also the progression piece of how that talent then thrives within your law firm and moves through. We want to make sure that it's a holistic plan, and that within that we have a clear sense also of the role that the law firms can play collectively and individually within that. Obviously, it's fantastic having the university so embedded into this project, because part of that will be working with them, and as Jane Harrington has said, hopefully this will be the beginning of some longer term relationships that we can help strike up. So just in terms of the structure of the working groups, we have split them down into these three areas that make sense in terms of the different activities that the law firms already have. One, of course, is outreach. It's a lot of that work that happens upstream to identify talent, but also to help get more information to young people, help them understand what law is like, all of that work that happens upstream of a young person ever getting to the stage where they get into a recruitment process. I know a lot of the firms have different approaches. I know you have a lot of understanding and knowledge of how those approaches work for you. What we want to do with that is make sure that we can harvest all of that. So that's the first group. I'll come on to how we do this in a second. The second working group is going to be looking at recruitment. That process, obviously, of taking that very disparate group of people who apply for those roles within your firms, and then the process by which you bring them on board. I know you have different approaches on this too, and we really want to dig under the skin of that to understand how we can make sure that that's an enabler of you reaching that wider talent pool. The third working group will be looking at progression. And obviously this was an area that was also, I know, flagged up in some work that I think the Bridge Group did for the law sector quite recently, that was really looking at to what extent you see that diverse intake coming through its career within the law firms, and to what extent actually in reality you start to see some of those people perhaps leave once they're further along in their career, but there's an opportunity to look at how we can help retain that talent, and in doing so reap the rewards of the diversity. So these are the three bits of the pipeline, and the working groups will be looking at these different parts of the pipeline. So within each of those working groups, you will all then go through a common process. And this is why CIMA is going to get so busy at this stage, because all of the working groups are going to be going through a very logical process of 3 meetings. And I think the more that all of you, in a sense, can get prepared in advance of the meetings, the more we can use them as moments to have a really rich discussion. So I think for all of these meetings, if you're able to almost submit written evidence or written kind of views and information in advance of them, then the better chance that will give us as a team and CIMA to really get under the skin of what you're already saying, so that we can help get the most out of that time that we do get all of you together on these working groups. So the way that they will work is there'll be 3 steps to those. The first step will be very much looking at best practice and what you're already doing. There's a lot of work underway, but what we want to do is almost hone in on, if you like, your sense of what already works, but also perhaps what doesn't. What I mean by this is also not just looking in a sense at what you do, but how effective you feel it is, and to what extent you can be really specific about impact. So obviously there's one thing about having a school outreach project. To what extent can we really look at the impact that definitively has? It may be that you have data, it may be that you don't, but we want to get a sense of, if you like, how much we can bolt down whether or not these very different sorts of outreach, the work that you do on recruitment and on progression, to what extent it works. The more we can do that, I think the more we can start to really get under the skin of not just what works and what we already know about that, but also why it works. One of the things that I was always very focused on as a Secretary of State in 3 departments was what we called theory of change. In other words, it was an evidence-based look at how to develop policy from a perspective of saying, if we change this thing over here, why would we expect it to change anything over there? And if it's the thing over there that you want to impact, what is the logic that takes you from what you're saying we should do here to knowing that we will see a change over there? And so if you have insight, if you like, on your firm's almost theory of change around what you do on outreach and why you think that works and what the evidence is for that, or what you're doing on recruitment, what you're doing on progression, whether it's mentoring or anything, that's what we're really interested in getting in that very, very first session, so that we can finally harvest everything qualitatively and quantitatively to the extent we can of what works. So that is the first session, and the more specific you can be, the more data-driven you can be, the better. But if you haven't got the data, then give us the qualitative insight. Ideally, give it to us before the meetings so that we can really look at this. And on all of that, if you're sending us stuff beforehand, if you want, we won't send it around the wider group, but if you do want us to, we absolutely will be quite happy to do that. It's entirely up to the law firms. And I think for the universities, obviously, you have, particularly when it comes to outreach, your own experience of what works, possibly in terms of the law sector as well. So we'd be very interested to get your take from the university and higher education side on the sorts of things that you feel work when you've seen law companies do them. So the first meeting will be to bring together for those 3 working groups, all of them looking for their different bits at best practice and what works and why. The second meeting will then be going on from almost the insight of what works to looking at data and evidence around what the challenges are, and to really understanding, notwithstanding what we're already doing and why we think that closes particular gaps, where do we now see the remaining gaps lie? Where do we think the real challenges are? And how can we almost translate what we've learned from that initial sharing and discussion and insight on best practice to where those gaps are then on, if you like, the data and evidence around all of this. So for example, you look at all of the work that the legal sector has done on diversity over quite a prolonged period of time now. Yet, if you were looking at, if you like, the very top echelon of law firms today, I'm just giving you some stats here, 48% of partners are white male, 52% of those white males attended an independent school, 46% of associates attended an independent school. Those from lower socioeconomic and other minority backgrounds progress less quickly from senior associate to partner than peers from, if you like, white males from higher socioeconomic backgrounds. All of this, in a sense, was what the Bridge Group looked at. But I think what we really want to use that second session to dig into is, for each of your areas that you're focused on, where are those gaps, and almost what do they mean? So the first session we'll have talked about what's working and why, but actually the second session really is to say, well, is the best practice maybe not good enough? Is it not in as many areas as it could be? Is our sense of what we thought a theory of change was on all of this, like why doing that leads to this, maybe there's something missing in that we haven't really understood. So we really want to use that second session to sort of almost complete the look at, if you like, where we now need to focus. And it's then bringing those two lots of insight together, the what works plus the challenges, to then lead us to the final session, which is fine. Okay, what are the solutions then? And so this is why I was saying right up at the beginning, I genuinely think the more that we can work hard on those first two sessions and actually get everything on the table, I don't want a single bit of insight left in somebody's mind that they could have shared with the wider group. Please make sure that, you know, all of your experience is something that we can draw on from whatever side of the, you know, the debate that you're on. We want to be able to use both of those two sessions to then pull together, if you like, what the solutions are really in the third session. It's absolutely crucial then that I think we have some real creativity. I genuinely think that we should think outside the box, whether you're one of the VCs and a university involved in this, or whether you're one of the law firms. I think this is where we can really start to see the watershed moment come to fruition. I genuinely think that it's that everything is almost building up to that final group of meetings where you really say, right, so what do we do differently? What are the recommendations? So on the back of that, then we will pull together as a group the recommendations and the action plan. I will make sure that those recommendations, in a sense, are at a high enough level to be able to be applicable to all of the law firms, and of course, to the extent any relate to universities, that, you know, that they have some flexibility, but also we'll also try and make sure that they're specific enough to be clear cut in terms of what they mean and what the actions around them would mean. And obviously, I recognise that in the end we can come up with an action plan. I hope that the law firms involved in this will adopt it, but I recognise that in the end will be a decision, you know, hopefully that all of you will take, but it is a decision for you. So it's a very logical step through. I think all the way along this process, for you and the teams that you've got involved, always keep in mind where we are heading to, which is solutions, and being bold on what those solutions will look like, and making sure that we don't, if you like, just use this opportunity as another diagnosis. I think we've had a lot of those, and I think that, you know, the law sector really has had a lot of those, and I understand that. From my perspective, and I think from all of our perspectives, this is about going beyond that now to really saying, how do we solve the challenges, and what are the solutions around all of that? And so in a sense, the outcomes of this end up being three things: some solid recommendations on how we are going to change and what we will be doing after this project, some relationships, hopefully, that have been struck between law firms and the universities in a way that I hope can really be used as models for a wider professional services sector, potentially. And of course, then some change on the ground from all of this work. We have to be able to see it have impact on the ground. And I think I speak for all of us in saying we want to see that impact quickly, not something that will come in, you know, a few years' time, but actually we need to, my personal view, I think we need to be going into the summer seeing some early wins from this project of perhaps work experience summer programs, you know, that some of these wider groups can take part on, because we've got those relationships. struck up, and because we've been pulling together all of our ideas and thinking. So I think it's those three things: one, the actions and the recommendations; two, the relationships that need to be there to see them delivered; and three, the impact on the ground, ideally, hopefully starting this summer, so that we can then, as Edward said at the beginning of this, make sure that this is a piece of work that we can share with a wider world around how the legal sector is playing its role, its important role in levelling up. So yes, exciting times. I think some of you may have comments and questions. I've asked Seema to chair that piece of this opening meeting. So perhaps I'll hand over to Seema, and if there are questions that you have and comments, then we will potentially take those if you want on the chat. I should also say that if they're around processy things like the working group you're on, or how you submit evidence, then if you can sort of put them on the chat or email us offline, we'll take those offline. I think here, this part of the session, we're quite keen to get any more substantive questions or comments, including from obviously the lawyers and the VCs, of course, on the project itself and observation. So over to you, Seema, for that part. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Justine. And yes, it is exciting times. There's a lot to do. More exciting is me going to try and get marshal questions from 100 people when I can't see everybody at the same time. So if you could put your questions in the chat box while you're thinking about that, we thought it would be really good if we had the perspectives of some of the Vice-Chancellors that we've got on the call very briefly, and then I'm going to try and marshal the questions. I presume that some common themes will come out as well. Maybe is Karen from York St John? She's not on my home screen. Oh yes, I'm sorry, Karen. It would be super if we could just hear a little bit from you about your perspective on the organisation, and then I might ask Liz and Mark Power as well to speak. So Karen.
So yes, I'm Karen Bryan from York St John University. So York St John's has a very strong track record of diverse recruitment. 65% of our students have at least one characteristic associated with people who don't usually go to university. We have very good outcomes for our students, but many of them lack confidence. They don't have the sort of networks as Jane was talking about earlier. And the thought of going to London would be very daunting for them, but also financially really not possible. So, we have very good, diverse people who think differently, who have amazing backgrounds and experience, huge levels of resilience and problem solving. But for them, a London law firm would be something very difficult to sort of contemplate. And of course, there are lots of barriers, that the cost of going down to London, the cost of staying in London for an assessment weekend or whatever, all those sorts of things would be very difficult for many of these students to contemplate. So the question really is how we link that talent to companies who are willing to think differently, employ through different sorts of models, so that we can open doors for some of these students. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Mark Power from Liverpool's John Moores University is on the call. Could we hear from him, please?
Thank you, Seema. I mean, rather similar. We have a very, very diverse student body, and I think we're very, very proud, rightly so, of our work in sort of widening access, participation. That brings with it, of course, a whole set of challenges, and some of those challenges were referenced earlier, around students' social capital, around how we build and we scaffold a sort of a confidence and an ability and a network around them to allow them to achieve to their full potential. as a university, we have an employment rate of in excess of 96%, which is quite remarkable. However, the level of graduate level jobs becomes the real challenge. And again, that becomes a real focus when potential students are looking at the value of higher education, etc., in the professional field. So I've got one of my colleagues on the call here, Zia Chowdhury, a former barrister, who won't mind me saying that, who again is working with our law school in particular in terms of developing that confidence and developing that sense of ambition to be able to go and work at some of those top law firms across the UK.
Thank you very, very much, Mark. Liz, did you want to add anything?
Thanks, Seema. Yeah, Staffordshire University, very similar to what Karen and Mark have just said in terms of the number of students that we get from disadvantaged backgrounds, less traditional routes. And that reference to social capital, social networks, so different for many of our students. And I'm interested to understand how we might do something around role modelling, quite difficult, when many of the major companies do have traditionally middle-class white males in those key roles. And I'd love to look at how we might build a network where we can have the role models and mentors from a diverse group of lawyers and solicitors would be fantastic.
That's an excellent point, Liz. Thanks for bringing it up. And I'd now like to go to Bolton to hear Baroness Newlove. I know she's got something to share with us all.
Hello everyone, this has been a fantastic launch, and conversations I've had with Justine, I'm absolutely buzzing. To have so many law firms wanting to work can I thank you very much, because this is unheard of. And somebody who's really interested in law but never became a barrister or a solicitor, I'm really encouraged to hear how we're going to try a once in an opportunity to start the ball rolling. So it's more of an impassioned and excited comment in a sense. And I think most of the challenges have been explained, but I do like what Liz has just said about role modelling, middle class. And to put it in context, as somebody who went to the House of Lords at 47, London was a tourist city, not somewhere I worked. Manchester was my big city to work in. And so I get how are we going to break that barrier of actually getting that network of people, because somebody who had to learn how to network, I was a legal PA, I worked in courts. We don't network, we do a job. So I think it's the words, the networking, how we can move them along, get all the ducks lined up. But I am so excited to be involved in this, and I just can't wait to see what we get in the report. So that was just my comment for everybody. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very aware of time, so I'm going to hand back. We are going to record the chat, so make sure that we answer substantially to everything, but I'm going to hand over Justine now to close.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Seema. And thanks, everyone. I know it's challenging actually being on a Zoom call with nearly 100 people. I think I can honestly say this is probably the biggest Zoom call that I've had to help chair with Seema here. But really appreciated all of the thoughts from people and your time. We've got this brilliant opportunity. I think we need to make the most of it. The next steps now are to get prepared for that very first meeting of the working groups that will be happening over the next few days and couple of weeks. Let's make the most on that. Thank you very, very much for all of your engagement. It's been brilliant to be able to launch this project. And, if I can just finish off by saying a big thank you. I think people have decided to do this because it matters. I'm really genuinely grateful to the engagement from the City of London Law Society and the law firms, but also our universities. Thank you for being prepared to put your time into this. I think it's immensely important. It's been a really helpful kickoff to get you all together. And I think that's also hopefully helped you get a sense of almost how we approach this project and how the different bits of it all fit together. But in the meantime, an excellent start, I hope, and we're looking forward to the next steps. So thank you to everyone for all of your engagement. And as you can see right at the bottom of the chat, Danny at thisispurpose.com is where you can email further questions. So look, we've got a lot of work ahead of us, but I think we can hopefully get something excellent out of all of this engagement. So thank you very, very much. And yes, let's get cracking. Thank you.